So till now we have discussed about these three hierarchy system: the spinal cord, then there was the brainstem, then there is cortical area, cortex. So the spinal cord and brainstem, these circuit, they organize elementary movement, right? They organize the elementary movement in response to somatosensory, vestibular, mainly these two, somatosensory and vestibular, as well as few other stimuli. Okay, so that's how the spinal cord and brainstem, they perform these. Mainly this is the reflexive or repetitive movement, right? And these reflexive movement, they are stereotypical. Like if you hit a person knee with a knee hammer, there will be that extension of the leg. That is stereotypical. Now we will discuss about this cortex, the motor area of the cerebral cortex. It integrates. It's not only the elementary movement, it helps in performing the voluntary, and that is a complex movement. And how this complex movement is performed? It is performed with the help of integration of the visual. You can add the auditory and proprioceptive reception. Okay, proprioceptive reception. All these things, they are integrated to produce more elaborate or more complex voluntary movement. And what is the peculiarity of this movement? They can be modified. These can be modified accordingly or with practice, and they require planning, right? They require planning. So there it's happening planning as well as sequencing of the movement. Okay, planning and sequencing of the movement. Now the motor area of the cortex, it is divided into two types. One is the primary motor cortex, and second is the premotor areas, premotor cortex. These are several. So they contain the neurons, and these neurons, they project to spinal cord via corticospinal, and to nuclei, some of the nuclei that is located within the brainstem, that is corticobulbar tract. Now this primary motor cortex area, they are located like in the slide part, the PowerPoint part. I will tell you in detail about that diagram, but let me try to draw this one over here. Like say this is the cerebral cortex. Okay, cerebral cortex, cortical area, and this is the central sulcus. So in front of the central sulcus, this frontal area, this central gyrus, this is Brodmann area number 4, right? Brodmann area number 4. This is called as motor cortex. And in in the next part of this video, where I will explain with the help of the slides that diagram, there is a point-to-point topographical representation in it, right? The point-to-point topographical representation of the entire body. It's upside down. Say this is the lateral aspect. Say this is the lateral aspect. Then we can say this is the lateral aspect. Then this is the medial aspect. So the body is lying like upside down. This part, on the medial aspect, there is ankle, feet. Okay, then trunk. Accordingly, it is located. Okay, on the lateral aspect, and each area, like each body part, has got its own representation in the cortex. More finer movement like the hand, that everybody knows. You know about this thing, so I won't go into detail. You read it yourself. The hand part, then the neck part, or the, we can say, the face part, this tongue, larynx, laryngeal, where you are that body part which is used in performing fine movements, fine and complex movement. It has got major representation. Okay, major representation in this, that is called as topographical representation or homunculus, motor homunculus, similar to the sensory motor area, like topographical, like sensory motor area is over here. There was the topographical representation of the opposite side of the body, right? So that is the primary motor area, Broadman area number 4. Now this primary motor cortex, it is assisted by the other premotor areas, and within these premotor areas, they are surrounding part, like say if this is the premotor, then in front of this one, sorry, this is the primary motor, then in front of this one, that is the Broadman area number 6. This is the Broadman area number 6. That is the premotor area. Okay, premotor area. Now this premotor area, Broadman area number 6, it has its own neurons. It communicates with this motor cortex. And as we know, the motor cortex sends the fibers via the corticospinal tract to the spinal cord and the brainstem. Similarly, the fibers directly go from the premotor cortex to the spine or the brainstem, corticospinal tract. Interaction with the primary motor, as well as direct fibers going to the spinal cord. Now this premotor area, there are multiple premotor areas. They are broadly main, we can say there are 4. There are 4 main premotor areas. 2 on the lateral convexity and 2 on the medial convexity. On the lateral convexity, those 2 areas, they have been given name as lateral ventral premotor area, and similarly there is lateral, because they are present on the lateral, dorsal premotor area. These 2. Now the medial one is supplementary motor area. And the other one is cingulate, just cingulate, because it is located along the cingulate gyrus, on the bank of the, or we can say on the border of the cingulate sulcus. Okay, now each cortical motor area, it receives unique cortical as well as subcortical. It not only receives connections from all these premotor areas, it also receives connection from the somatosensory cortex, from the parietal area. Okay, from the parietal area. Like first it receives, say, the input that is coming from the somatosensory cortex, and somatosensory cortex area are area number 1, 2 and 3. Okay, area number 1, 2 and 3. One second, let me indicate the light over here. Okay, the area number 1, 2 and 3. It goes, that is the first. The second is primary motor cortex. It also receives input from posterior parietal area. Like say, if I draw this diagram, like say this is the one, this is the occipital lobe, this is the central gyrus. From the parietal part, it also receives from the parietal, posterior parietal area, and that area number 5 or sometimes 7, area number 5 and 7. Now what is the function of this area number, posterior parietal area number 5 and 7? They help in integrating multiple sensory input, integration. So it integrates the multiple sensory input and helps in motor planning, because the motor cortex plans a movement by getting this feedback the somatosensory feedback and then the multiple other sensory input through the posterior parietal area. That is the second one, right? Now the area number 5 and 7, this also goes to the, not only to the this primary motor, it also goes to the premotor areas, to the premotor area. Okay, premotor area. So premotor area is receiving input from posterior parietal area number 5 and 7, as well as it also receives from prefrontal area or frontal area. Just say it, frontal area number 46, frontal area number 46. So frontal area 46 and posterior parietal area number 5 and 7, both of them, they project to the premotor area. Now as I said, the motor area sends the signals to the spinal cord. To just imagine it is going to the motor neuron, a particular spinal segment's motor neuron, right? It goes over there. Now the premotor area also sends its own signal over there. So if there happen any issue in the motor area, say this motor area gets defected, there is some lesion or the blood supply is compromised only of this motor area, it means the premotor area is still working and premotor area is sending the fiber directly to the motor neuron. So the function which is controlled via the motor area might get hampered or impaired, but still some of the movement will be there, that characteristic of the movement which is controlled by the premotor area. So now we will talk about like what is exclusive function of the premotor and the motor. And before going to that, let me say this motor cortical area, motor cortex is plastic. You know what is plasticity? Plastic is like it can change, it can mold. Say there was an experiment done. In that experiment, what they did, like say they cut the or ablation of the motor cortex happened of that part which involves hand and finger movement. Hand and finger representation area of the motor cortex was lesioned either through the providing a cut or blood supply loss. Now what will happen? That particular person, they did it in a monkey. So what happened, it can be like say 20 monkey they took and they created a lesion in the hand and finger controlled motor area. Now they divided into 10 each out of those 20. Out of those 10, first 10, the monkey, they didn't use hand and finger at all. They didn't use hand and finger at all. They just try to replace this movement with the help of this one, elbow and shoulder movement, and the remaining 10, they forced these monkeys to keep on using the hand and finger, though they were not able to perform it collectively. Like say the hand and finger movement is to pick this pen up. If there is a lesion, that person won't be able to pick this pen up, but they persistently kept on persisting those monkeys to perform this movement. So instead of the fine, like say pincer grasp, I am picking up with this middle index and thumb finger. Instead of that, by practice, they kept on, at the end of like say 20 or 30 days, they started picking up. Though it was not fine, it was very coarse movement, but still they started performing the movement. And what the those scientists, they noticed that the area in the motor cortex which is representing the hand and finger, they destroyed it. They provided the less blood supply. Then it will get automatically thrombosed and it will die down. Okay, so the first 10 which were not using at all those hand and finger, like 90% of this area, it got lost. Now the remaining 10% viable area of the hand and finger, it was taken up by the neurons which control shoulder and elbow movement. right? Shoulder and elbow movement. Why? Because these 10 monkeys, they stopped using hand and finger, but instead of that they used more and more elbow and shoulder joint as compared to a normal monkey uses. So it needed more neurons. So those neurons, they covered this remaining viable 10%. So neurons, they increased in number over here. Now in the second scenario, the 10 monkeys where they kept on using the hand and finger. So this area was the area, motor cortex area, which represents hand and finger. They ablated it. So we can say 90% will get dead. Remaining 10%, with the help of remaining 10%, hand and finger movement are happening. Now the adjoining area to the hand and finger is elbow and shoulder. So their neurons, they went into elbow and shoulder area. Elbow and shoulder area neurons are working perfectly fine, whatever the function they have to perform. But the area, the neurons which is present in the remaining 10% viable area for the hand and finger, these neurons also started communicating with the surrounding elbow and shoulder representational area. That's why instead of 10%, they become like, they will never become the 100%, but 50 to 60% of the function was acquired. So we can say that is the plasticity. The motor cortex, this is plastic. So a person who suffers from the stroke, the physiotherapy is the must. Why? Because with the help of the physiotherapy, you keep on persisting that affected part to perform the movement. So ultimately, though there won't be return of the 100% fine movement, but still some percentage will be recovered. So that is the characteristic of this motor area. And now, like the premotor area and the supplementary motor area, all these areas, what is the function of these premotor and the supplementary motor area? They help in sequencing some of the functions, that is their characteristic features. Characteristic features means we can say they plan the premotor in sequence. Like a particular, say I have to pick this pen up, then the sequencing will be there. First I have to reach over there, and then I have to perform this movement. So the main contribution of the premotor area is in this sequencing part. Now these corticospinal tract, whether they are coming from the motor or the premotor, these corticospinal or the cortex, we can say, it controls the spinal motor neurons via direct and indirect pathway. What does that mean? Direct means, say, alpha motor neuron, right? Like we have done in the synapse. In the synapse, we are seeing there is sensory neuron bringing the information, then alpha motor neuron was contracting the muscle, right? So either those corticospinal tract will end directly on one of the alpha motor neuron, right? Alpha motor neuron, or these corticospinal tract will end up in the interneurons. So the direct one is this one, direct alpha motor neuron. The indirect is they are acting on the interneuron. Interneuron in turn is acting on the alpha motor neuron. So what is the basic difference? Basic difference is the direct connection affects only a particular defined muscle. If it is affecting the alpha motor neuron of a particular flexor muscle, it will just affect the flexor muscle. And via indirect, these corticospinal tracts, they end on the interneuron. These interneurons are multiple, they are widely distributed. They might affect the flexor, they might affect the extensor of one particular limb, or the flexor and extensor of the opposite limb, okay, contralateral. So via these direct and indirect, they have different wide distribution of the control over the motor activity, okay, motor activity. So in the end, we can say the primary motor cortex, it executes movements, and accordingly it adapts the movement by point to point. Like what is happening, it will take the cue, like if any particular movement is happening, it will take the cue and then accordingly it will change. So with the when the particular movement is happening, it will modify it, mold it accordingly. Okay, so that is, we can say, the function of the primary motor cortex. And this premotor cortex, what does this premotor cortex do? The premotor cortex is mainly the sequencing part. Like if they have done this experiment, in this experiment what they did is, like say they cut the area of the premotor of a particular animal, and then they thought, like say repetitive, say what is this sequencing and repetitive, like say I have to play one music instrument. Okay, in that music instrument, say like I have to play a guitar, then there should be particular movement, particular sequence of those fingers, like this one, first, second, third, fourth, or 3, 2, 1, all these kind of the sequencing of the finger movement to happen. This is done with the help of the premotor area. Premotor area is main contributor in sequencing those finger movement, like whether the first is supposed to happen, first will press the wire, or the third, or the fourth, or 2, that sequencing. Okay, so with this view, let's go into detail about all these areas. See, in the exam they will ask you like the motor cortex and all this, then you have to write down the things. So the primary motor area, we can say this one, okay, we will cover in the slide part. Okay, slide part.